talk to somebody, one person, a friend, a therapist, a co-worker, somebody, so that you're not isolated with these feelings, with the situation.
Escape the grip of a narcissist on our journey to recovery bliss. This is the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel with Jon and Padideh.
Good morning, Padideh. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
It's good to see your smiling face. I hope you had a wonderful weekend.
I did actually. Yeah, it was a little bit of traffic coming from Orange County, but not too bad. I'm just happy to be here and starting our third season. I almost can't believe I'm saying that.
No, it's amazing. Third season of the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. I almost forgot who we were. So it's really exciting to continue to be helping people recover and to highlight issues that they might or might not have. We've heard from an awful lot of people who've listened in, and there's a lot of identification going on and validation for people, and hopefully some growth as well as they learn to manage relationships with narcissists.
Yeah, I know. I'm really excited. I know we've gotten like 15, 5-star reviews. So I think that's a good sign. The main thing is we just want to help the community recognize what this is, what they're dealing with, and hopefully recover and come on the other side of all this. So just really excited to be taping our third season now.
Yeah, I actually had a friend of a friend who my friend recommended me to the friend, and then found out that he'd already followed us on Spotify and didn't realize it was me.
Oh my goodness.
It was kind of funny. That's a really interesting way to, it's the first time that's happened.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, Padideh, you want to introduce our guest today?
Yeah, I'm really excited. So we have Bill Eddy. Oh my goodness, it's so good to see you. I'm so excited for this conversation. I've been following your work for quite some time. I don't know if you know that or not. You are a lawyer like myself. I know you started the High Conflict Institute. Tell us a little bit about your work and what you do.
Well, just the progression. I started out as a clinical social worker, so doing counseling with children, adults, couples, and families, psychiatric hospitals, outpatient clinics. But I found that I wanted to kind of help people resolve their conflicts more, and got interested in mediation, and then decided to go to law school. And I did, primarily to do mediation, but when I was in law school, I realized I kind of liked the practice of law, the analytical thinking and explaining really what's going on. So I ended up practicing family law for 15 years after 12 years as a therapist, then switching primarily to mediation, but also education. So we founded High Conflict Institute in 2008, myself and Megan Hunter. And we've been really educating a lot of family lawyers, judges, mediators, but also in the workplace, human resources, in communities, government agencies, police, etc. So high conflict seems to be everywhere.
It really does. It really does. So that's amazing. So right now, currently, you don't have, you're not practicing family law, but you're doing sort of the consultation, right, and working with lawyers and clients and that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the consultation really pulls it all together, and people want to know, what should I do? Maybe they have a high conflict divorce case, and maybe they have a lawyer, and I'll meet with them and their lawyer on Zoom, spend an hour kind of helping them understand dynamics, especially personality dynamics, but also strategies for their family court case, for managing a difficult co-parent. And I'll often work with individuals who don't have lawyers, and they go, what should I do? Help, I can't afford $150,000 in legal fees anymore. What should I do? So I give them tips, give them a lot of resources. We have articles, books, videos. So we're really a big resource for managing high conflict situations. And my consultations are to give people strategies. So I don't take them as a law client, don't give legal advice, not doing therapy. I'm helping them strategize what to do. And often nobody else has this broad perspective I do, so they find that really helpful.
Yeah, I think what you do is amazing. I mean, and you've written books. Tell us about the books, some of the titles. You have these like great titles to these books. Tell us some of the books you've written.
Well, there's a wide range. So I've got, in terms of divorce, probably the most popular book is called Splitting: Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Narcissistic or Borderline Personality Disorder. I've also developed a method called BIF, Brief, Informative, Friendly, and Firm, for writing emails to each other. And that's really our second most popular book. Then, of course, the most recent book is Our New World of Adult Bullies, because we seem to be on the increase of that. With all the knowledge we have, it's getting kind of worse, and especially since the pandemic, and we want to give people skills and tools to help them calm situations or, if necessary, disengage.
Wow, that's amazing. That's exactly what we talk about on this podcast is, dealing with high conflict individuals, narcissists, other cluster B personality disorders. So we're just so thrilled to have you. And we know this is going to be such an amazing episode for our listeners. I want to know from, your extensive experience, both on being a clinician and an attorney and all the things, what are the primary psychological dynamics that make it so incredibly difficult for someone to break away from relationships with a narcissistic or other cluster B personality disorders? Like, what are some of those, what makes it so difficult?
Yeah, it's interesting because on the surface, it looks like, oh, why don't you just leave? And
Correct.
yet it's like a magnet being held in. And the psychological, well, first of all, there's financial dynamics. Often people are concerned about loss of income, loss of support, all of that. But the psychological dynamics are more hidden. And people say to themselves, well, I know I should leave, but I just can't. And part of it is this sense of being worn down, that narcissistic people put out a lot of negativity towards the people around them to put themselves up. They put the people around them down. And so you get a lot of messages, you're a mess, look at you, you can't succeed at anything, without me you'd be nothing. That you hear this kind of thing over and over again. You're a terrible parent, the children don't like you. Now, none of this may be true, but these are the kinds of messages. And what happens is people absorb those and feel worse and worse and worse. And as time goes by, with a barrage of these kind of messages, especially if the person is isolated from other people, then this is all they absorb, and they feel worse and worse, less energy, more depressed, lower self-esteem. And it gets harder to get away because of that. And there's a dynamic called the principle of reciprocity. This is about relationships, that if you're a warm, caring person, you hook up with a warm, caring person, it goes back and forth a lot. But if you get in a relationship where one person's more domineering and the other person's more submissive or deferential, that just grows worse and worse and worse and worse. And so people feel, I'm a really inadequate, incompetent person. I really can't leave.
Wow, that's amazing. I can tell you from my own experience, having been married to an overt narcissist, that's exactly what happened. So over a 7-year period, it was like, you're not good enough, you're not this, you're not pretty enough, there's always somebody better. And so at the end of it, it was like, I'm going to dump you for a model. And it was like, here I was, a successful lawyer. I was advocating for other, clients. I was advocating in DV cases and all the things, that a lawyer does. But I was so beaten down down. It was like, and then at 34, when I finally left him, I was only 34 years old. He was like, nobody's going to want a lawyer. I mean, who wants to marry a divorce lawyer? And so I really believe that. So exactly what you're saying, you absorb all that negativity and you start to believe that about yourself. Jon, did you have something like that with your covert narcissist ex?
It was very passive. While she would not say these things to me face to face, more because I'd kind of come after her if she did. Like, I was not passive in the relationship whatsoever. She was saying these kinds of things to other people, therapists and things like that. So I knew instinctively that these kinds of things were coming my way, but it was not the kind of thing where I would tolerate that kind of conversation with me. And I think she knew that. Bill, it sounds like, when people get to the place where they finally want to leave, they're at their absolute lowest when it comes to narcissistic abuse. Here they are having to make what are perhaps the most significant decisions of their lives, financially and for family and things like that, and they've been beat down to a place where they've got nothing left, and yet have to go tackle this most difficult of situations that they will ever have to tackle in their lives.
Yeah, what I see is that it's often at that point that they finally reach out to get help. And I give the example in Our New World of Adult Bullies book. A famous British singer and actress who got into a abusive relationship with an actor in Los Angeles, and she said, for a year I just got worn down and worn down and worn down. Finally, with the help of a therapist, I got out. And she was like you, successful, everything's going well, but she believed that she couldn't leave, that she wasn't competent. And that's the thing. It's a story that they spin, and it's not the reality. And that's important to know. This is the story of you, not the real you. And I think that's when people turn around. That's where therapists often help, but also listening to programs like this can help. People go, oh, maybe that's what's going on. There's nothing wrong with me. I've been worn down by this situation.
Well, I also want to say, to your point, narcissists, and I'm sure you agree with this, they always pick people, right, that they can get something from. So these people are never losers. These people are usually at the height of their career. They're going places. They either are wealthy or educated or all the things, right? So they think, okay, how can I bring this really good person down to my level? And so, but I don't, like, if you ask me today, 15 years after the divorce, how I even believe that, I couldn't tell you, because it was psychological warfare. And it was like a drop every day. It was like a little bit, right? It wasn't like all at once, but it was like just a little bit every day to make me believe, like, yeah, who would want to be with me? And 15 years later, I have a great marriage. My husband makes, he laughs. He's like, yeah, I married a divorce attorney. Either I'm super smart, or I'm really not that smart at all. And so he jokes about that, but it's like, I can't imagine how I actually believe that about myself.
That's the thing, is that, like you said, it's the drip, 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 drip. And in many ways, it's subtle and unconscious. You get arrogant looks at yourself. You get little subtle things to show you that you're incompetent. And so you start believing that. It's that you start believing their story of you. And what's interesting, you said something that's helpful to understand with narcissistic abusive personalities, is they do start by wanting to get the prize. So you were a prize. You were the perfect image of someone successful that will make them look good. But then they can't help themselves. They start chipping away, and creating this story of you not being a competent person, etc. Mm-hmm. And so that's what fools people with narcissists, because it looks like they're going to treat you like you're a goddess. But in fact, that's going to fade once they have you, and then they're going to chip away.
Yes, that's
Bill,
amazing.
So Bill, is the and you handle tons of and you sit with tons of people who are in high conflict situations. Um, in your estimation, does one of those two people most of the time have significantly narcissistic tendencies? Um, or is it, because in my head I'm going, well, narcissists are always blaming the person who they're abusing pretty consistently, and you have one person. The dynamic is you usually have one person, the victim, just desperate to try and figure out how to go deal with these people, and the other just dialing in and giving ridiculous abuse to the other. Is that kind of the situation that you normally encounter?
Well, yeah, with narcissists, so you see that, but all abusive personalities have different strategies. So, for example, with borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, we often see more violence. And so there's research saying those are predictive for violence, although not everyone with those diagnoses are violent. And so the violence often wears people down. But the thing with narcissists is it's this story, this barrage of, everything about you is bad and I'm perfect, I'm wonderful. So I think what happens is it grows. That, there may be an imbalance at the beginning because narcissists are very aggressive. But slowly over time, they become more aggressive and the other person becomes more submissive. And that's the thing. And people probably hate hearing that, like, I'm not a submissive person. But in this relationship, I'm becoming a submissive person. And the earlier people can spot that and realize, wait, this is a dynamic. I don't want to be part of this, the better.
That's interesting because in our relationship, we were church going, we were, Christians, we were church going, although I was driving most of that. And so when you say submissive, that goes so much, like the Christian church is so much about, women submit to your husbands, but they leave out the part of like, as Christ submits, right, to God. So that's the story he kept saying, like, you're not submissive, you're not being submissive enough. And I kept saying, oh my gosh, what else do you want me to do? And so that's, talk to us a little bit about that submission part, because I don't think that maybe our listeners really understand what you mean by that.
Well, it's a psychological concept. Like I said, that principle of reciprocity, that there's a give and take that reinforces each other. So the question is, if you become a submissive person in the relationship, there may be decisions. I think, all healthy relationships, people make different decisions and go, okay, I defer to you on this decision, you defer to me on that decision. And I think that's what it should be. It's not you're a lesser person. And I think that's what gets mixed into this is you're a lesser person, I'm a superior person. And that's very much the narcissistic theme music is I'm a superior person. And that's not healthy in the long term in relationships.
I used to joke with my ex, I used to call her, I used to say, I married my better half. And one day she said, I just want you to know, I really believe that.
Oh my goodness.
Just flat out told me, I really believed that I was the better half and that I was the one who was the real champion and the one to be had.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Sometimes they get real enough to get the truth out of them.
Well, I think that there's a lot of cultural beliefs. We get them a lot from songs and such that make people feel like you're not a whole person unless you have this other person. And what I've seen helping people get divorced and seeing some of them remarry and have new relationships is you need to be two whole people. And sometimes people need to take time off, see a therapist, become a whole person. Then you're going to have a happier relationship. If you're looking for part of yourself that's not realistic, and you're not going to find that, and it sets you up for a problem.
So are you saying that the verse, you complete me in Jerry Maguire is not true? Is that what you're saying, Bill?
That's what I'm saying. Yep.
Okay. So, many people describe feeling trapped or losing their own self in the relationship. Can you explain how the behavior of a narcissist specifically erodes a person's ability to diagnose the toxicity, and ultimately, how does one person leave?
Yeah, so first of all, so in many ways, narcissists are acting badly. And what they're doing is distracting you from that by saying, it's your fault. I shouldn't have had to do this, but I had to because you did this. I'm preventing you from leaving the house because I know you're a mess. You're going to go out there. You might have an accident. You're incompetent, and I need to do this to you. And person's going, gee, what's wrong with me? Well, it's not them. This is wrong. You should not be blocked from leaving. Talk about feeling trapped. They often say things like, you don't need them. All you need is me. I should be enough for you. And so that's part of the pattern of being trapped, is emotionally, psychologically really becoming trapped, and sometimes physically, taking your phone away, things like that. That's actually a form of abuse. In terms of getting out, so I see three areas. First is your self-talk. Is start telling yourself, it's not about me. I'm a good person. I'm okay. That behavior that's coming at me is the problem. So you build your self-esteem, rebuild your self-esteem. And I've talked to people, men and women, more women than men are in these situations, but men also are, that they say, I really thought there was something wrong with me. And I say, no one deserves abuse. No one deserves disrespect. That the happiest relationships are equal relationships. And so just the self-talk, I don't deserve this, I'm okay, I'm a good person, I can become strong and I can do what I need to do. So the self-talk, I'd say, is number one. You can start that immediately. Second is getting help. And I think especially from professionals, from therapists, from lawyers, etc., who've been through this before. You're a lawyer. I don't know how many cases you've handled, but you see similar patterns and you know things that help people, and you've seen successes. And so to know that there is help out there is so important. And then the third thing, I think, is changing the cultural awareness. And that's where programs like your program is doing this. I think our books, et cetera, are helping with this. So people really learn these problems are going on more than people realize because they go on in private. So in many ways, this is exposing a problem, but along with its solutions. So as people personally gain self-awareness, as they get help, and as the culture changes, that's how I see this getting better.
Bill, have you had situations where you feel like men in particular are slow to understand that they're being abused? As I've kind of gotten into this circle of talking to men and having conversations, one, they don't, generally speaking, adopt the word "I'm being" or the phrase "I'm being abused" so easily, and I think that also culturally, as you kind of mentioned, there's an amount of abuse perhaps that every man feels like he should take. One of the things that surprised me, I started asking around, even of friends whose marriages I respected. I'd ask, hey, has your wife ever hit you? And the numbers were so ridiculously high, I couldn't believe it. So it's like men are just expected to absorb some of this, perhaps more than women, where they would cry foul immediately. So I wonder if you think that, or if you've seen that men are kind of slow on the uptake in actually understanding that.
Absolutely. So yes, what we see is men tell themselves, I'm the man, I should take it. It's not a big deal. That no one's going to want to hear about this. In many cases, the man is larger than the woman. And so there's like, I should be able to, cope with this, whether I'm getting slapped or hit. I think of an example I had, which didn't have any violence in it, but it had coercive control financially, where the woman convinced the man he was incompetent with numbers, and he wasn't. but she convinced him that she took total control of the finances. And by the time he came to me about a divorce, he said, I know she's hidden a lot of our money because we're not living at the lifestyle we should be with our two incomes. And yet he was terrified of facing her. Like he said, well, we have to be in court. Do I have to, say negative things about her? And so he was very fearful emotionally of her and ashamed. And I think shame is often a factor that stops men from taking action where there's something like this. And I want to add something in here. In regard to people with the narcissistic personalities, in some cases, couples counseling, family counseling may make a difference, and in other cases, it might not. So I don't want to just say discard the relationship, but have your eyes open, try things like that, and if they won't go and they don't want to make any efforts to change, then leaving becomes sometimes the last option. So I just want to get that in there. But for men and women, it can be hard. And for men, that additional shame, you don't hear about many men saying this. And that's part of why.
And I think it's a shot at their masculinity too, which most men treasure. I've not been able to go manage. They feel like, right or not, that they're the heads of the family, and that they really should be able to handle these kinds of things. And when they can't, it's a shot at their masculinity. I failed as a man.
Absolutely.
So are you saying that you suggest going to therapy with a narcissist?
Well, here's the thing. I suggest trying that and be prepared. Many therapists don't recognize narcissists in couples. And the narcissist will say, hey, I'm doing okay, but she's really a mess. And she does this, and this. And the therapist hears this, and this, goes, oh, I have solutions for that. Ma'am, you need to work on blah, 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 blah. And they just totally go with the narcissist's story of what's happening.
Yes.
So I think people need to be prepared, but some people are willing to work on themselves. And there's a real spectrum of narcissism,
yes,
as well as other cluster B personalities, especially. I always believe you want to give it a shot, but don't exhaust yourself there. If there's no progress after a couple couples counseling sessions, that may not be helpful. And if you're getting verbally abused in a couples session, which many people report to me that didn't work, then call a halt to that. Encourage your partner to get counseling themselves. Get counseling for yourself. So I just see, because some people say, well, Bill, you're in a hurry to tell people to leave, and I'm not. I see that as a last resort, but I don't want people to stay stuck in situations that aren't going to change. So see if you can get a change, and if you can't, then it may be time to leave.
Right.
I think that's really good advice. In fact, I would tell you, I did that. One of the people I work with in my day job used to be a licensed clinical therapist, and he said, I've never seen somebody work so hard at moving your relationship forward. And this over a period, of 27 years, and the last 15 or so, he knew me, and watched as I tried piece after piece after piece, element after element after element, including therapy, and bringing her to a therapist, which is how I actually wound up getting her diagnosed. The nice thing about your advice, I think, Bill, is that on the other side of having left, and like you suggest, divorce was not my first thing. Right. I tell people it was an act of absolute desperation and protection on my part. Towards the end, there was nothing left to go do and nothing left to go try. But now having left, and by the way, today is the 5-year anniversary of my divorce, which I'm very excited about. So I'm celebrating with you, Bill.
There you go. All right.
Yeah. There is such peace inside.
Yeah.
Knowing that I tried I tried everything I could possibly try. I put my hand to absolutely everything I could put my hand to. I turned over every stone I could possibly turn over to try and bring healing to her and also to our marriage at the same time. And knowing that I did that, there's amazing. I sleep really well. I'm able to put my head to the pillow at night very peacefully, knowing that I really took the time to try and go make it work.
Good point. I think that's important.
I can tell you about my experiences that we went to several different therapists, because as soon as a therapist would say, I don't think this is going to work, he would say, okay, we need to go find a different therapist. And so really we went to couples therapists. I went to therapy on my own. And then towards the end, I found a therapist who said, you know what? Okay, I've seen you a couple sessions. I want to meet him. Well, when he came in, we were sitting on a couch like you and I are sitting, Bill. And, he kind of said all, his stuff. And the therapist said, okay, next week I just want to see her by herself again. So I went in, and I was really beat down. I mean, I was wearing my pajamas, and I was wearing Uggs because literally I was so beat down I couldn't even fathom dressing up right for this therapy session. And he said to me, you need to leave this person. If you don't leave this person, he's going to kill you. That's how, because once he saw him, that's what he got from it. So I was like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, no, this is really bad. I don't think you know what you're dealing with. So you're absolutely right. For me, I had to go to therapy and just make sure that it wasn't going to work. Otherwise, I don't think I could have lived with myself, because there would have always been this thing in my head, because you love this person, right? That's the other thing. You're love bonded to them. You're thinking they're your savior, or there's going to be nobody else in the world for me. So I had to go the distance just like Jon did.
Let me just say, though, that the more educated people become, the less people have to exhaust themselves with therapy to become aware, okay, I am dealing with a pattern that isn't going to change. And that's a lot of what I communicate in court, is judges say, well, let's give this person another chance. Let's do 50-50 parenting. And I'm sure, he'll be more responsive in the future. And the thing is, if you have 10 years of history showing there's not going to be a change, is judges, lawyers, therapists all need to see when, you're pretty much at a dead end, and acknowledge that. Because I think, and we say this to employers too, they often let high conflict people stay a year or two too long. And so the more educated people become, the earlier they may see these. But I really appreciate what you're each saying, that because you exhausted yourselves with that, you feel really resolved now. And I think it's good for people to hear that.
And you mentioned, go ahead.
I was thinking also, the harder part for me was finding a good therapist. I think finding somebody who actually, the adage is always, well, it takes two to tango. And I think when married couples who are in conflict walk into the counseling session, if you believe that it does that each person is constantly the aggressor, then you wind up in a situation where you really don't get help, because it takes, I've always said it takes two to build a good marriage and only one to make a bad one. And I don't think that all therapists believe that to be true. Where perhaps the more empathetic person who's more than likely the victim, their problem is loyalty to somebody which is a positive characteristic, but it can be abused as well. And that's their issue. But what they bring to the table are good things that are being abused, not bad stuff. So having a therapist that actually embraces the fact that it can be just one who destroys a relationship, I think sometimes is hard to find.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned about, sort of this co-parenting space. Obviously as an attorney, I deal with a lot of couples that have a child or children, and they're dealing with this narcissist. Now they know what this is, right? They're like, okay, my spouse is a narcissist. How do you resolve, high conflict? You talk about high conflict, there it is. What are some of the suggestions for anyone that's listening today about, how to resolve conflict, or what do you do when you're in this co-parenting, or we call it anti-parenting type of relationship?
A lot of our focus, especially with High Conflict Institute over the last 17 years, is teaching skills. And our approach is if we can teach skills of writing decent emails. That's our BIF method, and we have that book, BIF for Co-Parent Communication. If we can teach giving statements that show empathy, attention, and respect, we call them ear statements. We can teach that and have people practice that. Also, making proposals. We have a 3-step proposal making method to help people make decisions. And also, we're now teaching a new skill we call SLIC solutions, SLIC, setting limits and imposing consequences. Because with high conflict people, you set limits, they ignore that. You have to have consequences. So helping people think through setting limits and imposing consequences. By teaching individuals these skills, they can manage the co-parenting relationship better, and ideally, if both people get taught these skills. So we developed a method called New Ways for Families in 2009, and we developed it as a counseling method, then an online class, then coaching with the online class. So we've had this going for 16 years, and the online class for 10 years. The idea is if the court orders people to learn skills, co-parenting skills, there's a better chance that they're going to be able to soften that relationship and work together more. And if both people go through this, then they can really communicate more easily. And even if one person goes through this, they can soften their side of the co-parent, as well as setting limits and imposing consequences. People have to think about that, especially with a narcissistic co-parent.
Oh, I love that. That's wonderful.
And co-parenting is the place where the necessity for having to go resolve high conflict situations is just ongoing. We talk oftentimes about high conflict divorces and things like that. There's an end to a divorce at some point in time. The couple is afforded the divorce and they don't have to live in a relationship anymore and perhaps deal with each other in the same kind of way. However, the problem is oftentimes they're still having to go deal with that particular toxic personality in an ongoing situation with respect to the children. And that makes it very difficult long term.
Yeah. Let me add something here briefly, and that is a dynamic I see particularly with narcissistic personalities after divorce, is custody disputes after divorce where the narcissist has had some unrelated setback in their life. Maybe they had a new relationship and then it fell apart, or maybe their job really collapsed, or they had a business that fell apart. And it's a narcissistic injury, and they look around, where can I kind of rebuild myself? You know what? I'm going to get custody of our child, even though I have a third of the time and the other parent has majority. I'm going to put them down, and I'm going to show I should be the one who has primary custody. And I've seen this happen about 10 times, where someone goes back to court. The parent who's had the majority of time is doing fine, but this parent is so aggressive that they convince the court that there's a problem in the other parent's behavior and that they should get custody. I had a case like this with a 15-year-old. My client was the mother. Things are going fine. And father decides he's had some setbacks. He's going to get custody of the 15-year-old. And so he uses his time to feed the 15-year-old boy all these negative messages about mom. Boy comes back to mom, says, Mom, you know what? You're annoying. You know what? You're too controlling. Anyway, so they go to court, and he gets a recommendation from the court counselor to be primary custodial parent. And my client says, fine, let him go. So he goes. And then the father really wasn't that interested in the boy. He wanted the title. And he takes a job out of town, and he's gone during the week, home on the weekends. And the boy goes back to mom's house and says, guess what, Mom? I have an idea. Why don't I live with you, but let's say Dad has custody? And Mom calls me, can I do that? And I said, yeah, I just know at any time he could pull the plug on it. And that's what they did. The boy had it figured out.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I think a lot of children these days, it's not like when I was first practicing law 22 years ago. I feel like children get it. I've had a 12-year-old a couple weeks ago come into mediation, and she told the mediator exactly what she wanted. She said, my dad, drinks alcohol. He drives under the influence. She had the whole thing to the mediator. I was sitting in there. I couldn't believe how she was speaking, like almost like a 40 or 50-year-old person. And afterwards I said to her, I said, how did you know like how to talk to the mediator and what to say? She said, oh, on the way to court I was texting my friend whose parents are also getting a divorce, and so I knew exactly like what to say and how to say it. And she's like, it was all true. And I'm like, no, I believe you. She's like, but I just, I kind of, so they teach each other, to your point. But you're absolutely right that 15-year-old definitely had the father figured out. And so that's great that he was able to do that and tell the mom and kind of explain it to the mom.
And that's where the kids, wind up being involved in the high conflict relationship. The situation Bill described, the narcissistic or high conflict parent actually manipulated the child to choose. By the time they're 15, in most states, they can choose who they want to go live with. So
not officially.
They're manipulating.
Not officially. I want to make sure people know it's not officially, but in practice, it's often the case.
It's different state by state, but oftentimes they take the child's desires into account.
Right.
By the time they're 15 years old, where would you like to live? And this manipulation is coming at the child about the parent who's generally the victim. That makes it even more difficult. They're teaching the child to not choose the parent who's been abused the whole way.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. So what is one piece of advice that you would get for somebody, or that you would give to somebody who's struggling to leave? Just one piece of advice, like what would that be?
I'd say number one would be talk to somebody. Don't be isolated, because so many people I've worked with were isolated for a long time and afraid to tell anybody. Talk to somebody, one person, a friend, a therapist, a co-worker, somebody, so that you're not isolated with these feelings, with the situation, etc. And I think, people just do that. Like think of someone you can talk to. That makes a world of difference. You're not dealing with this alone, because so much this goes on out of sight of everybody else. And you need to know it's really not about you. You don't deserve this kind of treatment. And when you isolate yourself, you start telling yourself you do deserve this. So if one thing, reach out, talk to somebody about what's going on.
I think that's great advice. I know for myself, I was extremely isolated. It was like work and home to him. And he had actually made sure that my family was estranged from me.
Yeah.
Even though I had no problems, and I still to this day have no problems with my family, but he made sure that, they were far enough. And so, that isolation, it's almost like that, it's triggering that word, because I feel very, felt very isolated, and it was just, my world was just him and his daughter. That was my world. And so, that's really good advice, to just talk to someone. And, I think that's what I did. Actually, I went and sought therapy, and it still took a long time, because I didn't want to believe, right? Because I knew once you admit that this person is abusing you in a narcissistic way, then you have to leave. And I wasn't ready to leave. And I wasn't ready to give up. That was like, I'm not going to give up on us, right? So anything else, Jon, that you want to talk about?
Yeah, you want to make sure that those people are trusted and kind of emotionally capable of understanding your situation. In my particular situation, since I was married to a covert narcissist, her public persona was so good that the people I reached out to just didn't believe that it was possible. I can remember sitting with a pastor when I was explaining to him what went on, and he said, "Here's what I want you to go do. I want you to go home. I want you to make love to your wife, and I want you to go make this right." Okay, I'll do that. Like, she wanted that anyways. So I found that not all people were good people to have a conversation with, but you have to have somebody who believes you, that and will listen and listen to your side of it. Because again, in my situation, the public persona of my ex was so good, and continues to be so good. There are a group of people around her, including family and pastors and things like that, that believe her and wouldn't even consider or hear my side of what was taking place.
Yeah, let me comment a couple things here. One is I want to emphasize the concept of negative advocates, that what we see, high conflict people with cluster B personality disorders especially, are good at gathering people to tell their story to that will believe their story because that's all they're hearing. And so negative advocates reinforce the narcissistic personality and understand that that's happening. Also, a lot of professionals don't really see this and have values that block seeing it, like that all couple communication is contributed to equally by each party. And I was trained kind of in that concept, see how each person contributes. But as I learned about like the principle of reciprocity, in some cases there's an abusive person and a submissive person to that, and they're not the cause of their own abuse. So there's a lot of education of professionals. So be prepared for that. Find people you can talk to. That's a lot of the consultations I do. They haven't found someone that understands. They read one of my books. They said, hopefully you'll understand. And that's so powerful for people to have even one person who understands what's going on. So be aware of that, educate yourself, and look for help. Realize not everybody understands, but there are people who do.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a great conversation, and Bill, thanks so much for your time today. Bill, tell us how people can find you and talk about your books, and let's go through all that, because these are valuable resources for people, particularly who are in high conflict relationships, for people who are in relationships with narcissists, who have to get out of relationships with narcissists, who are co-parenting with narcissists. So talk to us about your books real quick, and how people can find you.
Yeah, so highconflictinstitute.com is where to find me, and you can set up consultations with me. You can find all our books. You can find video training. We have a lot of 1-hour videos. We also have a lot of free articles that people can get help from, that, just go sign up for our monthly newsletter, because then we announce things. So we're definitely a big resource. In terms of books, I've written about 20 books, some of them co-authored. I mentioned the BIF for co-parent communication book. If you just get one book and you're facing all of this, that's probably a good one to get, because right away you can change your emails so that you'd feel more empowered. The book Splitting I mentioned, if you're considering separating, getting divorced, read that before you take any action, if you can, because we talk about ways to prepare, as well as what to expect in court, what to expect from the high conflict person when things escalate into a dispute over the kids, etc. Then there's a variety of other books. Like I said, Our New World of Adult Bullies just came out last year, talks about bullying in families, in the workplace, in communities, everywhere, because it seems to be increasing. We have a book, Dating Radar, after helping people get divorced from high conflict situations, is helping people avoid getting into these situations. There's a lot of warning signs that people don't know to look for, or that they ignore. And so that's a helpful book. Books you can get anywhere, and a lot of them are also ebooks, so you can listen to them while you're driving in traffic. All of that.
And Bill, the podcast too, which name I love.
Yes.
I laugh. I had a good belly laugh for that.
We have a podcast we've had for several years now, myself and Megan Hunter, who's the CEO of High Conflict Institute, and it's called It's All Your Fault, dealing with high conflict people.
That's a great name.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Padideh. So good to see you again. I'm Jon McKenney, and this is the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. You can also find us at narc.podcast on Instagram, or check in on Spotify or on Apple Music, and you'll find us there as well just by looking up Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. It's been a fantastic time, and thank you so much for your attention, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you for listening to the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on Instagram with the handle narc.podcast. The guest views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are their own. The information presented is for general information purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. The co-hosts are not licensed therapists. Seek professional help, as information is often state-specific. The Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel is produced in studios in San Diego, California.